the new god of incorruption, the new gods of incorruption, the new god of incorruption, the new goddess of incorruption, the new goddesses of incorruption, the new goddess of incorruption, the old god of incorruption, the old gods of incorruption, the old god of incorruption, the old goddess of incorruption, the old goddesses of incorruption, the old goddess of incorruption, the greater god of incorruption, the greater gods of incorruption, the greater god of incorruption, the greater goddess of incorruption, the greater goddesses of incorruption, the greater goddess of incorruption, the lesser god of incorruption, the lesser gods of incorruption, the lesser god of incorruption, the lesser goddess of incorruption, the lesser goddesses of incorruption, the lesser goddess of incorruption, the higher god of incorruption, the higher gods of incorruption, the higher god of incorruption, the higher goddess of incorruption, the higher goddesses of incorruption, the higher goddess of incorruption, the lower god of incorruption, the lower gods of incorruption, the lower god of incorruption, the lower goddess of incorruption, the lower goddesses of incorruption, the lower goddess of incorruption, the greater spirit of incorruption, the greater spirits of incorruption, the greater spirit of incorruption, the lesser spirit of incorruption, the lesser spirits of incorruption, the lesser spirit of incorruption, the higher spirit of incorruption, the higher spirits of incorruption, the higher spirit of incorruption, the lower spirit of incorruption, the lower spirits of incorruption, the lower spirit of incorruption, the major god of incorruption, the major gods of incorruption, the major god of incorruption, the major goddess of incorruption, the major goddesses of incorruption, the major goddess of incorruption, the minor god of incorruption, the minor gods of incorruption, the minor god of incorruption, the minor goddess of incorruption, the minor goddesses of incorruption, the minor goddess of incorruption, the superior god of incorruption, the superior gods of incorruption, the superior god of incorruption, the superior goddess of incorruption, the superior goddesses of incorruption, the superior goddess of incorruption, the inferior god of incorruption, the inferior gods of incorruption, the inferior god of incorruption, the inferior goddess of incorruption, the inferior goddesses of incorruption, the inferior goddess of incorruption, the ancestor god of incorruption, the ancestor gods of incorruption, the ancestor god of incorruption, the ancestor goddess of incorruption, the ancestor goddesses of incorruption, the ancestor goddess of incorruption, the ascendant god of incorruption, the ascendant gods of incorruption, the ascendant god of incorruption, the ascendant goddess of incorruption, the ascendant goddesses of incorruption, the ascendant goddess of incorruption, the descendant god of incorruption, the descendant gods of incorruption, the descendant god of incorruption, the descendant goddess of incorruption, the descendant goddesses of incorruption, the descendant goddess of incorruption, the transcendent god of incorruption, the transcendent gods of incorruption, the transcendent god of incorruption, the transcendent goddess of incorruption, the transcendent goddesses of incorruption, the transcendent goddess of incorruption, the past god of incorruption, the past gods of incorruption, the past god of incorruption, the past goddess of incorruption, the past goddesses of incorruption, the past goddess of incorruption, the present god of incorruption, the present gods of incorruption, the present god of incorruption, the present goddess of incorruption, the present goddesses of incorruption, the present goddess of incorruption, the future god of incorruption, the future gods of incorruption, the future god of incorruption, the future goddess of incorruption, the future goddesses of incorruption, the future goddess of incorruption, the authentic god of incorruption, the authentic gods of incorruption, the authentic god of incorruption, the authentic goddess of incorruption, the authentic goddesses of incorruption, the authentic goddess of incorruption, the synthetic god of incorruption, the synthetic gods of incorruption, the synthetic god of incorruption, the synthetic goddess of incorruption, the synthetic goddesses of incorruption, the synthetic goddess of incorruption, the progressive god of incorruption, the progressive gods of incorruption, the progressive god of incorruption, the progressive goddess of incorruption, The progressive goddesses of incorruption. The progressive goddess of incorruption. The regressive god of incorruption. The regressive gods of incorruption. The regressive god of incorruption. The regressive goddess of incorruption. The regressive goddesses of incorruption. The regressive goddess of incorruption. The ordinary god of incorruption. The ordinary gods of incorruption. The ordinary god of incorruption. The ordinary goddess of incorruption. The ordinary goddesses of incorruption. The ordinary goddess of incorruption. The extraordinary god of incorruption. The extraordinary gods of incorruption. The extraordinary god of incorruption. The extraordinary goddess of incorruption. The extraordinary goddesses of incorruption. The extraordinary goddess of incorruption. The static god of incorruption. The static gods of incorruption. The static god of incorruption. The static goddess of incorruption. The static goddesses of incorruption. The static goddess of incorruption. The dynamic god of incorruption. The dynamic gods of incorruption. The dynamic god of incorruption. The dynamic goddess of incorruption. The dynamic goddesses of incorruption. The dynamic goddess of incorruption. The land god of incorruption. The land gods of incorruption. The land god of incorruption. The land goddess of incorruption. The land goddesses of incorruption. The land goddess of incorruption. The sea god of incorruption. The sea gods of incorruption. The sea god of incorruption. The sea goddess of incorruption. The sea goddesses of incorruption. The sea goddess of incorruption. The sky god of incorruption. The sky gods of incorruption. The sky god of incorruption. The sky goddess of incorruption. The sky goddesses of incorruption. The sky goddess of incorruption. The god of incorruption. The gods of incorruption. The god of incorruption. The goddess of incorruption. The goddesses of incorruption. The goddess of incorruption. The half god of incorruption. The half gods of incorruption. The half god of incorruption. The half goddess of incorruption. The half goddesses of incorruption. The half goddess of incorruption. The vessel of incorruption. The vessels of incorruption. The vessel of incorruption. The name of incorruption. The names of incorruption. The name of incorruption. The person of incorruption. The persons of incorruption. The person of incorruption. The persona of incorruption. The personas of incorruption. The persona of incorruption. The personage of incorruption. The personages of incorruption. The personage of incorruption. The personality of incorruption. The personalities of incorruption. The personality of incorruption. The personification of incorruption. The personifications of incorruption. The personification of incorruption. The image of incorruption. The images of incorruption. The image of incorruption. The imagination of incorruption. The imaginations of incorruption. The imagination of incorruption. The belief of incorruption. The beliefs of incorruption. The belief of incorruption. The thought of incorruption. The thoughts of incorruption. The thought of incorruption. The word of incorruption. The words of incorruption. The word of incorruption. The action of incorruption. The actions of incorruption. The action of incorruption. The reaction of incorruption. The reactions of incorruption. The reaction of incorruption. The feeling of incorruption. The feelings of incorruption. The feeling of incorruption. The situation of incorruption. The situations of incorruption. The situation of incorruption. The circumstance of incorruption. The circumstances of incorruption. The circumstance of incorruption. The environment of incorruption. The environments of incorruption. The environment of incorruption. The relationship of incorruption. The relationships of incorruption. The relationship of incorruption. The number of incorruption. The numbers of incorruption. The number of incorruption. The formula of incorruption. The formulas of incorruption. The formula of incorruption. The equation of incorruption. The equations of incorruption. The equation of incorruption. The theory of incorruption. The theories of incorruption. The theory of incorruption. The symbol of incorruption. The symbols of incorruption. The symbol of incorruption. The color of incorruption. The colors of incorruption. The color of incorruption. The thing of incorruption. The things of incorruption. The thing of incorruption. The way of incorruption. The ways of incorruption. the way of incorruption, the place of incorruption, the places of incorruption, the place of incorruption, the time of incorruption, the times of incorruption, the time of incorruption, the event of incorruption, the events of incorruption, the event of incorruption, the result of incorruption, the results of incorruption, the result of incorruption, the crown of incorruption, the crowns of incorruption, the crown of incorruption, the throne of incorruption, the thrones of incorruption, the throne of incorruption, the incorruption king, the incorruption kings, the incorruption kingdom, the incorruption kingdoms, the incorruption king subject, the incorruption king subjects, the incorruption king's dominion, the incorruption king's dominions, the kingdom of incorruption, the kingdoms of incorruption, the kingdom of incorruption, the incorruption queen, the incorruption queens, the incorruption queendom, the incorruption queendoms, the incorruption queen subject, the incorruption queen subjects, the incorruption queen's dominion, the incorruption queen's dominions, the queendom of incorruption, the queendoms of incorruption, the queendom of incorruption, the incorruption prince, the incorruption princes, the incorruption princedom, the incorruption princedoms, the incorruption prince's subject, the incorruption prince's subjects, the incorruption prince's dominion, the incorruption prince's dominions, the princedom of incorruption, the princedoms of incorruption, the princedom of incorruption, the incorruption princess, the incorruption princesses, the incorruption princessdom, the incorruption princessdoms, the incorruption princess's subject, the incorruption princess's subjects, the incorruption princess's dominion, the incorruption princess's dominions, the princessdom of incorruption, the princessdoms of incorruption, the princessdom of incorruption, the lord of incorruption, the lords of incorruption, the lord of incorruption, the lordess of incorruption, the lordesses of incorruption, the lordess of incorruption, the priest of incorruption, the priests of incorruption, the priest of incorruption, the priestess of incorruption, the priestesses of incorruption, the priestess of incorruption, the ritual of incorruption, the rituals of incorruption, the ritual of incorruption, the shrine of incorruption, the shrines of incorruption, the shrine of incorruption, the temple of incorruption, the temples of incorruption, the temple of incorruption, the leader of incorruption, the leaders of incorruption, the leader of incorruption, the follower of incorruption, the followers of incorruption, the follower of incorruption, the natural substance of incorruption, the natural substances of incorruption, the natural substance of incorruption, the supernatural substance of incorruption, the supernatural substances of incorruption, the supernatural substance of incorruption, the temporal substance of incorruption, the temporal substances of incorruption, the temporal substance of incorruption, the spiritual substance of incorruption, the spiritual substances of incorruption, the spiritual substance of incorruption, the natural form of incorruption, the natural forms of incorruption, the natural form of incorruption, the supernatural form of incorruption, the supernatural forms of incorruption, the supernatural form of incorruption, the temporal form of incorruption, the temporal forms of incorruption, the temporal form of incorruption, the spiritual form of incorruption, the spiritual forms of incorruption, the spiritual form of incorruption, the age of incorruption, the ages of incorruption, the age of incorruption, the era of incorruption, the heiress of incorruption, the era of incorruption, the awakener of incorruption, the awakeners of incorruption, the awakener of incorruption, the awakening of incorruption, the awakenings of incorruption, the awakening of incorruption, the realm of incorruption, the realms of incorruption, the realm of incorruption, the dimension of incorruption, the dimensions of incorruption, the dimension of incorruption, the zone of incorruption, the zones of incorruption, the zone of incorruption, the frequency of incorruption, the frequencies of incorruption, the frequency of incorruption, the century of incorruption, the centuries of incorruption, the century of incorruption, the millennium of incorruption, the millenniums of incorruption, The millennium of incorruption. The purpose of incorruption. The purposes of incorruption. The purpose of incorruption. The meaning of incorruption. The meanings of incorruption. The meaning of incorruption. The culture of incorruption. The cultures of incorruption. The culture of incorruption. The demonstrator of incorruption. The demonstrators of incorruption. The demonstrator of incorruption. The demonstration of incorruption. The demonstrations of incorruption. The demonstration of incorruption. The manifester of incorruption. The manifestors of incorruption. The manifester of incorruption. The manifestation of incorruption. The manifestations of incorruption. The manifestation of incorruption. The presence of incorruption. The presences of incorruption. The presence of incorruption. The glow of incorruption. The glows of incorruption. The glow of incorruption. The goal of incorruption. The goals of incorruption. The goal of incorruption. The plan of incorruption. The plans of incorruption. The plan of incorruption. The book of incorruption. The books of incorruption. The book of incorruption. The philosopher of incorruption. The philosophers of incorruption. The philosopher of incorruption. The philosophy of incorruption. The philosophies of incorruption. The philosophy of incorruption. The releaser of incorruption. The releasers of incorruption. The releaser of incorruption. The release of incorruption. The releases of incorruption. The release of incorruption. The variable of incorruption. The variables of incorruption. The variable of incorruption. The cause of incorruption. The causes of incorruption. The cause of incorruption. The effect of incorruption. The effects of incorruption. The effect of incorruption. The journey of incorruption. The journeys of incorruption. The journey of incorruption. The emergence of incorruption. The emergences of incorruption. The emergence of incorruption. The source of incorruption. The sources of incorruption. The source of incorruption. The originator of incorruption. The originators of incorruption. The originator of incorruption. The origin of incorruption. The origins of incorruption. The origin of incorruption. The forefather of incorruption. The forefathers of incorruption. The forefather of incorruption. The foremother of incorruption. The foremothers of incorruption. The foremother of incorruption. The ancestor of incorruption. The ancestors of incorruption. The ancestor of incorruption. The descendant of incorruption. The descendants of incorruption. The descendant of incorruption. The lineage of incorruption. The lineages of incorruption. The lineage of incorruption. The heritage of incorruption. The heritages of incorruption. The heritage of incorruption. The heir of incorruption. The heirs of incorruption. The heir of incorruption. The co-heir of incorruption. The co-heirs of incorruption. The co-heir of incorruption. The joint heir of incorruption. The joint heirs of incorruption. The joint heir of incorruption. The dynasty of incorruption. The dynasties of incorruption. The dynasty of incorruption. The force of incorruption. The forces of incorruption. The force of incorruption. The law of incorruption. The laws of incorruption. The law of incorruption. The pact of incorruption. The pacts of incorruption. The pact of incorruption. The game of incorruption. The games of incorruption. The game of incorruption. The mask of incorruption. The masks of incorruption. The mask of incorruption. The armor of incorruption. The armors of incorruption. The armor of incorruption. The sword of incorruption. The swords of incorruption. The sword of incorruption. The shield of incorruption. The shields of incorruption. The shield of incorruption. The force shield of incorruption. The force shields of incorruption. The force shield of incorruption. The armored force shield of incorruption. The armored force shields of incorruption. The armored force shield of incorruption. The champion of incorruption. The champions of incorruption. The champion of incorruption. The guardian of incorruption. The guardians of incorruption. The guardian of incorruption. The defender of incorruption. The defenders of incorruption. The defender of incorruption. The protector of incorruption. The protectors of incorruption. The protector of incorruption. The chant of incorruption. The chants of incorruption. The chant of incorruption. The shape of incorruption. The shapes of incorruption. The shape of incorruption. The cube of incorruption. the cubes of incorruption, the cube of incorruption, the cuboid of incorruption, the cuboids of incorruption, the cuboid of incorruption, the sphere of incorruption, the spheres of incorruption, the sphere of incorruption, the spheroid of incorruption, the spheroids of incorruption, the spheroid of incorruption, the prism of incorruption, the prisms of incorruption, the prism of incorruption, the pyramid of incorruption, the pyramids of incorruption, the pyramid of incorruption, the cylinder of incorruption, the cylinders of incorruption, the cylinder of incorruption, the cone of incorruption, the cones of incorruption, the cone of incorruption, the triangle of incorruption, the triangles of incorruption, the triangle of incorruption, the circle of incorruption, the circles of incorruption, the circle of incorruption, the semicircle of incorruption, the semicircles of incorruption, the semicircle of incorruption, the square of incorruption, the squares of incorruption, the square of incorruption, the rectangle of incorruption, the rectangles of incorruption, the rectangle of incorruption, the parallelogram of incorruption, the parallelograms of incorruption, the parallelogram of incorruption, the rhombus of incorruption, the rhombuses of incorruption, the rhombus of incorruption, the trapezoid of incorruption, the trapezoids of incorruption, the trapezoid of incorruption, the polygon of incorruption, the polygons of incorruption, the polygon of incorruption, the pentagon of incorruption, the pentagons of incorruption, the pentagon of incorruption, the hexagon of incorruption, the hexagons of incorruption, the hexagon of incorruption, the septagon of incorruption, the septagons of incorruption, the septagon of incorruption, the octagon of incorruption, the octagons of incorruption, the octagon of incorruption, the nonagon of incorruption, the nonagons of incorruption, the nonagon of incorruption, the decagon of incorruption, the decagons of incorruption, the decagon of incorruption, the evolution of incorruption, the evolutions of incorruption, the evolution of incorruption, the revolution of incorruption, the revolutions of incorruption, the revolution of incorruption, the elemental art of incorruption, the elemental arts of incorruption, the elemental art of incorruption, the elemental science of incorruption, the elemental sciences of incorruption, the elemental science of incorruption, the elemental principle of incorruption, the elemental principles of incorruption, the elemental principle of incorruption, the elemental technology of incorruption, the elemental technologies of incorruption, the elemental technology of incorruption, the low elemental art of incorruption, the low elemental arts of incorruption, the low elemental art of incorruption, the low elemental science of incorruption, the low elemental sciences of incorruption, the low elemental science of incorruption, the low elemental principle of incorruption, the low elemental principles of incorruption, the low elemental principle of incorruption, the low elemental technology of incorruption, the low elemental technologies of incorruption, the low elemental technology of incorruption, the high elemental art of incorruption, the high elemental arts of incorruption, the high elemental art of incorruption, the high elemental science of incorruption, the high elemental sciences of incorruption, the high elemental science of incorruption, the high elemental principle of incorruption, the high elemental principles of incorruption, the high elemental principle of incorruption, the high elemental technology of incorruption, the high elemental technologies of incorruption, the high elemental technology of incorruption, the agent of incorruption, the agents of incorruption, the agent of incorruption, the agency of incorruption, the agencies of incorruption, the agency of incorruption, the amplifier of incorruption, the amplifiers of incorruption, the amplifier of incorruption, the amplification of incorruption, the amplifications of incorruption, the amplification of incorruption, the enhancer of incorruption, the enhancers of incorruption, the enhancer of incorruption, the enhancement of incorruption, the enhancements of incorruption, the enhancement of incorruption, the magnifier of incorruption, the magnifiers of incorruption, the magnifier of incorruption, the magnification of incorruption, the magnifications of incorruption, the magnification of incorruption, the influencer of incorruption, The influencers of incorruption. The influencer of incorruption. The influence of incorruption. The influences of incorruption. The influence of incorruption. The emanator of incorruption. The emanators of incorruption. The emanator of incorruption. The emanation of incorruption. The emanations of incorruption. The emanation of incorruption. The converger of incorruption. The convergers of incorruption. The converger of incorruption. The convergence of incorruption. The convergences of incorruption. The convergence of incorruption. The aura of incorruption. The auras of incorruption. The aura of incorruption. The impression of incorruption. The impressions of incorruption. The impression of incorruption. The intelligence of incorruption. The intelligences of incorruption. The intelligence of incorruption. The sophistication of incorruption. The sophistications of incorruption. The sophistication of incorruption. The genius of incorruption. The geniuses of incorruption. The genius of incorruption. The polymath of incorruption. The polymaths of incorruption. The polymath of incorruption. The psychic of incorruption. The psychics of incorruption. The psychic of incorruption. The knowledge of incorruption. The knowledges of incorruption. The knowledge of incorruption. The understanding of incorruption. The understandings of incorruption. The understanding of incorruption. The wisdom of incorruption. The wisdoms of incorruption. The wisdom of incorruption. The secret of incorruption. The secrets of incorruption. The secret of incorruption. The mystery of incorruption. The mysteries of incorruption. The mystery of incorruption. The revelation of incorruption. The revelations of incorruption. The revelation of incorruption. The tactic of incorruption. The tactics of incorruption. The tactic of incorruption. The strategy of incorruption. The strategies of incorruption. The strategy of incorruption. The strength of incorruption. The strengths of incorruption. The strength of incorruption. The might of incorruption. The mights of incorruption. The might of incorruption. The power of incorruption. The powers of incorruption. The power of incorruption. The authority of incorruption. The authorities of incorruption. The authority of incorruption. The dominion of incorruption. The dominions of incorruption. The dominion of incorruption. The rhythm of incorruption. The rhythms of incorruption. The rhythm of incorruption. The melody of incorruption. The melodies of incorruption. The melody of incorruption. The music of incorruption. The musics of incorruption. The music of incorruption. The lyric of incorruption. The lyrics of incorruption. The lyric of incorruption. The song of incorruption. The songs of incorruption. The song of incorruption. The dance of incorruption. The dances of incorruption. The dance of incorruption. The spirit of incorruption. The spirits of incorruption. The spirit of incorruption. The soul of incorruption. The souls of incorruption. The soul of incorruption. The body of incorruption. The bodies of incorruption. The body of incorruption. The mark of incorruption. The marks of incorruption. The mark of incorruption. The promise of incorruption. The promises of incorruption. The promise of incorruption. The visionary of incorruption. The visionaries of incorruption. The visionary of incorruption. The vision of incorruption. The visions of incorruption. The vision of incorruption. The picture of incorruption. The pictures of incorruption. The picture of incorruption. The sound of incorruption. The sounds of incorruption. The sound of incorruption. The dung of incorruption. The dungs of incorruption. The dung of incorruption. The language of incorruption. The languages of incorruption. The language of incorruption. The communication of incorruption. The communications of incorruption. The communication of incorruption. The people of incorruption. The peoples of incorruption. The people of incorruption. The society of incorruption. The societies of incorruption. The society of incorruption. The fortress of incorruption. The fortresses of incorruption. The fortress of incorruption. The government of incorruption. The governments of incorruption. The government of incorruption. The city of incorruption. The cities of incorruption. The city of incorruption. The nation of incorruption. The nations of incorruption. The nation of incorruption. The civilization of incorruption. The civilizations of incorruption. The civilization of incorruption. The world of incorruption. The worlds of incorruption. The world of incorruption.